Rudyard Kipling was a British writer, poet, he was also a civil servant. Lived in India and spent time in Afghanistan and a lot of other places. He said that all good people agree, all good people say, all nice people like us are we, and everyone else is they. Does everybody get that? All good people agree and all good people say, right? All nice people like us are we, and everyone else is they. Now, that was also, I think, expanded on by a Scottish psychiatrist called R.D. Laing, who wrote a book called Knots. And it's a very funny book in that it's a knot itself, that you have to unravel it. It's a very strange book to read. It's not like any other book you'll read. It's not that long, but I can sum up Knots in a few sentences. The basic premise of the book, Knots, by R.D. Laing, is if all the good people kill all the bad people, there won't be any people left. Because the good people of the bad people are the bad people of the good people, and the bad people of the good people are the good people of the bad people. So that's the knot. Everybody got that? Good. Now here's where I think it gets interesting. I was thinking, I flew today from San Francisco to Chicago, the Windy City, from, I don't know what we call San Francisco. It's a gay and breezy city, but there's probably other words that we can use to describe San Francisco. But I was thinking about identity and about kinds. I was thinking about kinds, and how we put people into categories, and it's part of the makeup of the human mind. In fact, cognitive science has proven that people are divided into two types. People that divide people into two types and everybody else. And there's a lot of truth to that. But we really do tend to divide people into two types, us and them. And this is what R.D. Laing was alluding to, but also what Rudyard Kipling was alluding to. So I'm thinking about this. I come off the airplane. I'm very tired, getting more tired as the minutes pass. But I'm walking down and I saw a new Newsweek, and I thought, in my moments of weakness, I read things like that. So I purchased Newsweek, and I gave her my card, and it's a debit card, but for some reason they still have you sign the debit things. So she handed me a pen, African-American girl. She handed me the pen, and she said, I took the pen with my left hand, and I started writing. Immediately, she broke into this really nice smile, and she said, "Oh, you're a lefty too." You see? And I looked at her and I said, all left-handed people are in their right mind. And she said, absolutely. Now what was interesting about that exchange, because I'm thinking about categories and kinds, is that this lady, as I walk up and think, she saw something that we share in common. We're left-handed. And being left-handed in a right-handed world is very difficult. People don't realize it. Well, how many left-handed people in this room? Seriously. Do you feel like you're an oppressed minority? Well, seriously. Scissors are for right-handed people. People don't realize that. You know how hard it is for us to use scissors? Right? Seriously. Left-handed people have more accidents than right-handed people. This is proven. There's a book on left-handed people arguing that we should actually get some kind of recompense for being left-handed. Now, also, there's a lot more brain disease in left-handed people as well. And it is very rare for left-handed people to live into their 80s. There are very few octogenarians that are left-handed. This is all proven. So left-handed people feel a solidarity. When you see somebody who's left-handed, you feel Obama's left-handed. Did you notice that? People didn't know. See, I'm left-handed, so I noticed that. When he was signing one of those things, unless they inverted the image. When I saw that he was left-handed, I said he's okay. Because I'm left-handed, and he must be okay, because if I'm left-handed, he's left-handed. Hey. So that's an example of this categorization that our mind does about identity. We identify with people that are similar to us. The more similarities, the greater the identification, right? Now, one of the problems with this quality of the mind is that as we particularize more and more our identities, we limit more and more who we feel comfortable with. The cults, small cults, are based on creating complete insularity. Cults don't want you to mix with the outside world, because it's harder to keep you in the cult if you mix with other people. The word tolerance in English is used in different ways, but the medical term of tolerance is that you build a tolerance to drugs. You can build a tolerance to alcohol. I don't drink, but if I did drink, if I had a tiny, one of those little things that in the movies they always knock them down, that one little thing will knock me down. Because I don't have a tolerance, I haven't built up. But if you see somebody who's an alcoholic, they'll drink the whole Jim Beam and ask for more without slurring the sentence. Because they've built up a tolerance. The more you are exposed to something, the more tolerance is created for that thing that you're exposed to. And this is why, as you begin to be exposed to others, you begin to see commonalities that you did not see before. This is really important, because this goes to the root of identity. Now, in America, this is a very interesting place, because so many, if you just look in this audience at all of the quote-unquote identities that are represented just in this room alone. If I was in Bangladesh, for instance, this auditorium would look very different. It would look very different. There would be more of a homogeneity. But if I go into a Bengali auditorium, it starts getting quite distinct. We recently read about this Afghan man, right? What's his name? Najibullah. Now, how's he presented in the press? How's he presented? Have you been following the story? Have you been following it? Nobody's following it? This is like a very serious, a guy who's trying to supposedly, allegedly blow up with hairspray or something, one of the buildings in New York. He's an Afghan. All right, it's presented as Afghan terrorist. Now, if you ask an Afghan, that's not good enough for an Afghan. He wants to know, is he a Pathan? Is he a Hazara? Is he a Dari? Is he a Kabuli? He wants to know what family he's from if he's a Pathan. Because he can determine, well, of course. Is he from a village or is he from a city? Because identity starts getting very particularized as we dig deeper. I'll give you an example. Military people are different from non-military people. Veterans are different from non-veterans. If you meet somebody who's a veteran, you automatically have something in common. Then you say, which branch were you in? He was in the Marines, you were in the Navy. Now there's a division. So you were united with veterans, but you were divided with which branch of the service. But it gets more than that. Because if you say, I was in the Navy, were you brown shoe or were you black shoe? And then if you were black shoe, were you on an aircraft carrier? Or were you on a destroyer or a submarine? If you were on a submarine, it's a completely different identity from a guy who's on an aircraft carrier, because all submarine people immediately have a camaraderie that nobody else can share with them because they've been in a submarine. And if you're not claustrophobic, and they find out that very quickly because they test people, there's a certain psychological profile that's needed and necessary to be put into a submarine. So, and then if you were on the submarine, were you a commander or an officer, or were you chief petty officer? Were you just one of the yeomen on the ship, a sailor? And if you were a sailor, are you a minority? Are you Hispanic or African American or white? If you're white, are you Protestant or Catholic? Are you Irish? It really starts to break down because we particularize ourselves. Oh, you're a football fan, so am I. What football team do you? Texas Longhorns, who else? Oklahoma Sooners. Now they're in a fist fight. They shared a love of football, but when they found out which team they actually liked, it descended into a brawl. Because of the identification. Because we're symbolic creatures and we identify with certain things. And the more we identify with another person, what does identity, what word do we have that's almost identical? I just used it. Identical. Identity is about identifying with somebody else. I identify with people that are like me. But how much are they like me? The more they are like me, the more I identify with them. So initially we like football. So we have something in common. We identify with each other. But now I find out you like my rival team. I no longer feel so much commonality with you anymore. So my identification with you is severed because of that difference. Look how this works in the real world. How many people know the two groups that were involved in the Rwandan genocide? What were they? The Hutu and the Tutsi. Does that mean anything to you or me? If you've been to Rwanda, that means something. For me, they're just words. Hutu, Tutsi. I don't know what they mean. I don't know. I couldn't tell a Hutu from a Tutsi. I can tell a Fulani from an Igbo. I can't personally. I was once in a taxi in New York, and Matt started talking, and I said, "Oh, you're Igbo." And he just looked back. He'd never seen a white person identify him as an Igbo before. He was completely flabbergasted, and he said, "How did you know I was Igbo?" And then I told him a story that he just laughed almost the whole way, the whole journey, when I told him my experiences in Igbo land. So, but I can tell West Africans reasonably well. I really can. I can distinguish and differentiate. But when we move into places like Rwanda, I don't have a clue. I can tell East Africans to a certain degree. I can tell Ethiopians always. And I know, I always say this to Ethiopians. If I meet Ethiopians, I say, "I know your secret." And they say, "What?" I say, "You bury your ugly children alive." And they look at me, "What?" I say, "I've never seen an ugly Ethiopian." And the only way you could accomplish that is by burying the ugly children. There's no other way. Most beautiful people in the world, Ethiopians, hands down. But Rwanda, Hutu, and Tutsi, I can't differentiate between Hutu and Tutsi. But they can differentiate between each other. During the Rwanda genocide, there was almost something like 800,000 people. But who knows what the real numbers are? I don't know. Genocides are very hard to... Nobody's out there counting every single body. But there were hundreds of thousands of people killed. Mostly Tutsi people. There was a case in a town, Soba in Rwanda, where hundreds of Tutsis fled to a convent because going to a monastery, right, that's a safe haven. The Mother Superior there, her name's Sister Gertrude. Doesn't sound very Rwandan, but that's another story. Sister Gertrude was a Hutu. When Sister Gertrude saw all these Tutsis, got on her cell phone and called the Hutu militia. They came and they massacred these Tutsi people. But Sister Gertrude would not allow them to kill the Tutsi nuns that were in her convent because they were part of her Christian family. One of her nuns had a niece there, Aline. who was a Tutsi who begged Sister Gertrude to allow her to wear the habit so she would avoid being killed, and Sister Gertrude refused. The reason I know this is because 7 years later, Sister Gertrude was put on trial in Belgium for war crimes, and she was convicted with eyewitness accounts of what she did, including one of the nuns who watched her niece killed because she would not give her a habit. This girl's mother, she was 19 years old, this girl's mother said, "My daughter was killed because of a piece of cloth." Now, on one level that's true. On another level it wasn't true. She was killed because she was a Tutsi, but the reason the Tutsis in the convent weren't killed was because there was something that transcended their Tutsiism, and that was that they were nuns under the authority of their mother superior, who was a Hutu, who saw their Tutsiism overridden by their Catholicism or their vows, or however else she perceived this in her mind. Now, one of the things about animals are very interesting. I had a really interesting experience the other day. I was driving in a windy road out in the middle of something. There was a car accident on the freeway inside the tunnel, and I had to get to Berkeley. And I have a GPS, so I did an off-road search, and it took me just on this amazing journey outside, somewhere I've never been. There were lakes, and this is right near my house. But I got behind this car that was going so slow, and there was this stunning dog in the back of the car that watched me the whole way. And we got to know each other pretty well. I was waving to him, he was kind of nodding and shaking. Now, that dog seemed fine with me being in the car, but had I gone to their house and come in, he might have started barking, he might not have. I'm a bit of a dog whisperer, so I probably could have subdued any negative energy he would have directed towards me. But dogs, right? Dogs are very loyal animals, right? They're loyal. They treat their group very well. One of the things about dogs are not symbolic. Just like Mother Superior saw a symbol in that, what that scarf meant, that she did not allow to be translatable to somebody that it did not have the same meaning for in order to save their life. Obviously, she probably needed some real catechism or something. I don't know. But a dog will not abandon you because of who you vote for. Right? Your dog will not give up on you because you voted for Obama. Your dog, if you put "End the War in Iraq," a sign on your front yard, the dog won't read it and then suddenly get kind of angry at you because the dog is pro-war. The dog's not going to do that. Why? Because the dog is not a symbolic creature. It doesn't understand symbols like humans do. Symbols are how we relate to each other. There's a symbol here in the women that have scarves on their heads. That's symbolic of something. It means something. It doesn't mean that they're Muslim only. There's a level of commitment. There's also a level of understanding. There's some people might not even consider that to be an obligation. So they're Muslim, they're woman, but they don't wear a scarf because they don't see that symbol as having the same meaning as it has to a woman who puts a scarf on her head. There are men in here that have beards. Now, they might just not like to shave. That's possible. Seriously, razors are expensive, shaving is a hassle, so I grow a beard. There's people that do that, and that's why they grow a beard. But there are people where the beard becomes a symbol. It means something. I'm symbolizing something when I grow my beard. Even the length of the beard symbolizes something, a certain understanding of Islam sometimes. If somebody has a short beard, there are some Muslims that won't even listen to them if they're talking about Islam because they think they don't know anything. Look how short their beard is. He can't tell me about the Sunnah because he doesn't even know the Sunnah of the beard. Now, he hasn't measured the beard and worked out, did your beard just stop growing at that point? That's a question. People always say, oh, he shaves his beard. I actually don't shave the side, but people have told me, why don't you grow your beard, brother? I don't, because it doesn't grow. I have a little bit there, but it just doesn't grow. So now I've solved the riddle for people. Right? I mean, people say he's got a fashionable goatee. what I got. There you go. But my beard is symbolic. I mean, I'm wearing the beard for a reason. It means something to me. And I don't shave it for a reason. So these are symbols that we identify with. Now, one of the really bizarre things about people is the Arabs say, كُلُّ غَرِيبٍ لِلْغَرِيبِ نَسِيبٍ. Every stranger to a stranger is a relative. It's an amazing statement because I have time tested this again and again, and it's absolutely true. You're in Paris, and you're sitting somewhere, and somebody sees you and says, excuse me, do you speak English? You say, yes, I speak English. Oh, you've got an American accent. Where are you from? I'm from San Francisco. My God, I'm from Nevada. Right? We're neighbors. And then they sit down, you have a coffee, you're exchanging emails, suddenly you're best friends, he's going to introduce you to his sister, you're going to get married, you become family. This happens in real life. Why? Seriously, why does it happen? Because you have an identification with that person as two Americans in a very anti-American city. Paris. They don't like Americans. So suddenly you have solidarity, camaraderie. Suddenly San Francisco and Las Vegas become very close. Now if I met this person in New York, I wouldn't give him the time of day, and he wouldn't give me the time of day, and if I bumped into him, he wouldn't say, oh, you've got an interesting accent, where are you from? Because we're in New York. Right? Seriously. And even though I don't talk like I'm from New York, there's people in New York that take lessons to learn how to talk like people from California. That's true. You can actually take courses in New York to get rid of your New York accent. Because people identify certain things with New York accents. Pushiness, aggressiveness, not very intelligent, didn't do very well in school. No, seriously, there's people, they hear accents and they automatically assume certain things. Which is why many African Americans in this country are diglostic. They speak two languages. This is true, it's a fact. They speak Ebonics, and then they speak languages that the dominant discourse feels more comfortable with. Because if they go to the job interview speaking Ebonics, they're not going to get the job. In many cases. Why? Because I can identify when you sound like me. Because I grew up in Westchester County. But when you sound like you came from Harlem, I can't identify with you anymore. Identity. Now, where am I taking all of this? This is where I'm taking. There are certain forms of Islam. Oh. I just found a quarter. Finders, keepers, losers, weepers. I was in California, and I met an Iranian lady, and we started talking. She had a hijab on, and I identified with her. Right? Really, I identified with her. I wouldn't have normally said this if I saw something, but I saw her, she had a hijab. We were near a place where I live, and I said, Salam alaikum. She said, wa alaikum salam. We started talking. I said, are you from Iran? Because I could tell from the accent. Yes. You know, Cheduri, Chedilogli, you know, I know about 5 Iranian words, and that worked. And then she said to me, I want to leave this country. And I said, why? And she said, my son found some money at school and went to the teacher to give it to the teacher, and the teacher said, oh, keep it, finders, keepers, losers, weepers. And she said that really bothered her, because in her culture, she said, we teach people to take it and give it back to its rightful owner. Identifying with something, it's a cultural norm that is different from my own cultural norm, that doesn't sound right. Another problem with identity. So, where am I going? I'm going here. There are Muslims, finders, keepers, losers. There are Muslims that believe that people who are not Muslim are less than human. Yes, there are. It's hard to believe, but there are. There are Muslims who believe that because somebody is not a Muslim, their wealth and their lives are halal. There are Muslims that believe this. I don't think anybody in here believes this, but there are Muslims who believe this. There are Jews in Israel who believe that a Palestinian is less than human. There are Jews. Barak Goldstein went into a mosque and just killed people praying because they were Arab and they were Muslim or whatever reason, but he, as a radical zealot, believed that they were less than human. When you dehumanize another, you can do whatever you want to them. Why? Because the least common denominator that we share as an identity is our humanity. That is the least common denominator. That's what goes under the fraction. Everything else is going to be negotiated. Whether you like football, whether you don't. Borat, Sasha Cohen, he went to Israel to interview a terrorist. And he met a Palestinian, they arranged it all, and he said, should I be worried? He said, God, no. He said, we love Ali G. Commonality. Right? Seriously, commonality. Whether that's a true story, I don't know. But commonality, least common denominators, humanity, shared humanity. Once we remove shared humanity, I no longer identify with you in any way, shape, or form. And I can do as I please. The same is true, one of the things that we see constantly happening in this country, in certain news forums, is the dehumanization of Muslims. When you send troops to a country, you don't want them to fraternize. There's a lot of work to keep them from interacting with people because it's very hard to shoot people that you start relating to or associating with. It's much easier in modern warfare. And somebody remarked, in fact it was John Dewey, remarked that war will not be abolished until we see peace as a heroic thing. But I would turn that on its head and really say that war will not be abolished until we show people how cravenly cowardly modern warfare is. There is no honor in dropping bombs from 30,000 feet on indiscriminate people. People that you have no way of telling whether they're an enemy, a friend, neutral, women, children. No way. Just drop bombs on them. The only way you can do that is by not identifying with them at all. You have no identification with them. And this is why dehumanizing people is one of the essential aspects of any pre-war period, where you begin to change the psychology of a people, make them see the people as less than human. Why is Israel so cut off from the Arabs? Why is there no interaction? I would argue, in many ways, because Palestinians are actually very nice people. Most of the Palestinians, I've rarely had a bad experience with Palestinians, rarely. A few times, and arguably, Palestinians have a right to be angry. I mean, I'm not going to, if somebody's angry and they're from Palestine, I'm not going to get on their case about being angry and being from Palestine. I'm always amazed, with African Americans in this country, I've always been amazed at how kind the majority of African Americans are with white people. I really am. I'm quite amazed. I'm always struck by how weird it is for like white racist skinhead type people with swastikas and things, and their anger and hatred towards black people. You kind of wonder, like, what is going on? What did black people do to make you so upset? Did they put you in chains on boats and drag you from your homeland over here and then enslave you for years and years on plantations and treat you as less than human? Is that what they did to make you so angry? I mean, it's quite extraordinary how certain white people can be so angry, but it's about identification. They don't see black people as human. If you dehumanize people, right? Why was it necessary not to teach African people in this country, in the South? There were laws against teaching them to read and write. Why? Why wouldn't you want them to learn to read and write? Reading and writing is advantageous. Why wouldn't you want them to read and write? Because they'll start sounding like you. If you minimalize their language, if you ghettoize them, if you treat them in ways that they behave differently from you, then you can completely detach yourself from them, alienate yourself from them, not see them, not identify with them, identity. Now, one of the things that's happening in the Muslim world, and we have to understand this, is the Muslim world has been under siege for a very long time. What is the most violent religion in the world historically? What? Now, I know because you were Catholic, aren't you? Yeah, so you can say that safely. Christianity, historically. And Christianity is not a violent religion. Christians in the past, let's get it straight, certain Christians in the past were incredibly violent and killed a lot of people. What's the second most violent religion historically? And this is done by historians looking at trying to count the numbers and the records. Obviously there's give and take, but what do you think is the second most violent religion in history? Buddhism. Now everybody associates Buddhism with like peaceful people and they love you. Buddhism has the best public relations going, seriously. And the Dalai Lama is amazing. I wish he would convert to Islam because he would just help us so much. Right? If he converted, it would be fantastic. The Dalai Lama, by the way, the Dalai Lama, his watch, the man who used to fix his watch in Tibet was a Muslim. And he said, I heard him say that, he said, he used to take, when his watch broke down, he'd take it to this Muslim guy. And he said the Muslim would always look at it, broke, and he'd like get upset. And he'd look at the Dalai Lama and say, this is like an egg in your pocket. And you should treat it like that. That was his advice. But in Tibet, do you know what Muslims do normally? Do you know the most common job for a Muslim in Tibet was a butcher. Because Muslims in Buddhist countries could kill animals. People don't know this. Buddhists cannot kill animals, but they can eat animals that are killed by others. So Muslims were the butchers in Vietnam for the Buddhists. They were the butchers for Buddhists in Tibet and Cambodia and many other places. That's a true historical fact. But if you look historically, now, interestingly enough, Islam out of the 7 major religions is at number 5 in terms of being violent. You know what the least violent religion of all the world's religions historically? Hinduism. Which is very odd because the Hindu book is basically, the Bhagavad Gita is about a war. I mean, it's a conversation in the middle of a battlefield, which Gandhi took as his inspiration for his pacifism. So figure that out. Okay? But it's very interesting when we think about Islam in this country, not me or you, but many people, when they think about Islam, they think of violence. Even though historically, Muslims have been largely far more Iranian or Pacific than other religious traditions that are associated with peace, like Christianity and Buddhism. It's very interesting. Now, do you know what Francis Bacon said? That the basis of the rise of the West is 3 things. Gunpowder, printing, and the magnet, because of the compass. Where did those 3 things come from? China. So the basis of the rise of the West, according to one of its philosophers, was China. Now that's very interesting because Max Weber said the basis of the rise of the West was gunpowder, printing, and the Protestant religion. So 2 out of 3 in Weber's formation come from China as well. So it's very interesting that Western people who would identify China as a backward type of country, and yet some of their preeminent thinkers view China as the source of their superiority over other countries in terms of power. Isn't that interesting? And yet Western people don't identify with China. They're, in fact, increasingly becoming afraid of China. And this is all very interesting, and it's very problematic. So when we look at different people and how they view, the fundamental problem that we all share is the problem of identity, how we conceive ourselves, who we think we are. There is a concept in Spain of the hidalguía, the hidalgo. The hidalgo is a, they're noblemen. They're like lower order, lower caste noblemen in traditional. And they were actually kind of almost like mercenary type people. They were usually military type people. And they actually went to other places in Europe to fight for European rulers and things. But the hidalgo came out of a reaction to the Muslims. The hidalgo, in fact, the word is called a Celt word in linguistics. It's Celt from the Arabic ibn Shaykh. In other words, like you have loan words that come directly from other languages. Right? So, vers libre is free verse. We just took that from the French and directly translated. The Spanish took Ibn Shaykh and turned it into hijo de algo, the son of something. Now the son of something was nothing, but he was not a Muslim. And that's how he became something, by being what he was not. Now unfortunately there are many Muslims that this has become the identity vis-a-vis the West. The West. This thing called the West. I identify as a Muslim in that I am not a kafir. My identity is a negative identity. It's not a positive identity. I'm not like them. I believe in Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They don't. They're kuffar. And then I interpret that also in ways in which I explain what's happening in my world, the type of powerlessness that I feel in my world, that this wouldn't happen if it wasn't for the evil West. I'll give you an example, and this is not a joke. I have a friend who studied in Damascus, and an American who mentioned to somebody who was in Damascus and said, the smog in Damascus is very bad. And he said, yes, al-Yahud. Really, al-Yahud. Amazing. It has nothing to do with the fact that we have no emission standards whatsoever in Syria, and that a lot of the cars have massive pollution. Damascus is in a valley. The stuff tends to stay in the valley. No, Yahud. Mu'amara Yahudi. هم الذين أدخلوا هذا الشيء. والله قبل فلسطين قبل إسرائيل ما كان عندنا هذا. I'm not making this up. It's amazing how people do this. So my problems become projected onto others. I begin to blame others for my problem. This is a very anti-Quranic view of the world. Because the Quran actually demands that you look to yourself, not to others. In the Quran, if you read the Quran, the one who blames others is called Iblis. Really, he's the one doing that. Adam takes blame for himself. And that's why he's given the Khilafah. Fakhruddin al-Razi said, had he not taken responsibility for his own sins, had he blamed it on Iblis, he would have never been given the Khilafah. Because the buck stops here. The buck stops here. If you want to have sovereignty, you have to take responsibility. You have to take responsibility. But Iblis didn't take responsibility. He even blamed God. Adam could have blamed, like there's other versions of that in other narratives. The man blames the woman. It's not my fault, she made me do it. The woman blames the snake. Those versions are out, but that's not our version, according to the Quranic narrative. I was once in a conversation with somebody, I'll veil the country, from a Muslim country, and This person lived in England, and he was explaining how that it was the British that did all the problems in the Muslim world came from the British. And there's a good argument for that. I mean, I could write a book proving that. But it's not Quranic, nor is it beneficial. So I began to quote verses from the Quran and show him how actually that was not a Quranic worldview. You know what he said to me? And I swear to God, this is true. He said, Wallahi kalamak sahih. What you say is true. But had it not been for the British, we'd still understand the Quran. At that point, I lost. He won, hands down. You can't argue with that. Now, what do we do? Where do we go from here? Kind. You're my kind. Right? For a number of reasons. Kind is from an Old English word, kin. Kin means family. Kin comes from a Sanskrit word, genus, which is where the Latin term genus comes from. The Arabic term jins comes from kind. Jins. Kind is a class. When you say he's of that kind, you're saying he's of that class. He's my kind of person. That's my kind of God. He's a kindred spirit. Kindred. Right? Where does kindness come from in the world? Kindness comes from recognizing the kindred spirit that we share. The kindness that I extend to you is because we are of the same kind. First and foremost, the first classification. إِنَّا خَلَقْنَاكُمْ مِنْ ذَكَرٍ وَأُنثَىٰ وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. I didn't pick that verse to be read tonight, but it was what I wanted to talk about. We have created you from the same two genders. You know what gender is? Gender is related to genus, is related to kind. Gender in old archaic English means kind. We created you from the two genders, the male and female kind. And we made you branches of those. Shu'ub. Shu'ub is branch. Shu'ba is the branch of a tree. The branch comes from the trunk. If you, as a branch, look at the trunk and say, I have nothing to do with that trunk. In fact, I'm going to cut myself off from that trunk. And if you do that, you die. You die. You cannot cut yourself off from Bani Adam. Because we're all kind of like kind. This is from God. It's not from me or you. And in recognizing that same kind, that identity is identical, that we share identical traits and characteristics in our common humanity, and that our humanity is always negotiated. Our humanity is always negotiated. It is in flux. It is moving in and out. It's like water. It's flowing. It's changing. People are not the same. You are not the same person that you were 10 years ago. You're a different person. You have new experiences. You've read books that you hadn't read before. You've thought about things that you never thought before. You've heard things that you never heard before, and they've changed you. We are being changed constantly, but we have certain common traits that are unchangeable, that make us human. When the Prophet ﷺ saw the Jewish funeral and stood up at a time when the Jews and the Muslims were hostile towards each other, he stood up, and one of his companions, this is in Sahih al-Bukhari, and one of his companions said, Yahudiyun ya Rasulullah? It's a Jew, ya Rasulullah. And he turned and said, Awalaysat nafsa? Isn't it a human being? In other words, he has a nafs, I have a nafs. I'm honoring that shared common humanity. That is enough going back to its Lord. How its Lord will judge it is entirely up to its Lord. It's not up to me. I can't condemn that soul to hell. And that is a very important point, because our theologians, and we have what I consider the most prominent Muslim theologian in America, in my personal opinion, Dr. Omar. And correct me if I'm wrong, because I'd like you to correct me. But the way I learned theology was, ta'yin al-kufr is haram. That you cannot call an individual a kafir, because what you're saying is he's mu'abbad, finnar, according to one view. There are two views about kufr. Is it a permanent state, or is it a state in flux? In other words, somebody can be in kufr and then go out of kufr, or is it a permanent state? That's a khilaf between the Maturidiyya and the Ash'ariyya. They differ on that, which is why some of them said, if somebody says, Ana mu'minun inshallah, because the Ash'ariyya can say that. The Maturidiyya cannot. They can't say, Ana mu'minun inshallah, I'm a believer inshallah. They have to believe that they are a believer, because their state is one of permanence. Whereas the Ash'ariyya say, no, it's in flux. People go in and out of kufr. So, the point being that to condemn somebody to the hellfire, no matter who they are, is nobody's business but God's. And there's an extraordinary hadith that the Prophet ﷺ mentions, in which he says that two Jews made a pact with each other. And one of them said, we're going to help each other. So if I see you sinning, I'm going to remind you. If you see me sinning, you remind me. Well, one of them was profligate. He was a sinner, just always doing it wrong. The other one was very pious. The one that was deviant really got fed up with this man. Self-righteous, always telling him, attacking that. Finally, he said, look, just leave me alone. And the man said to him, God will never forgive you. The Prophet ﷺ said when they died, they were brought before God. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, as for you, for him telling you that you're going to hell and that I'll never forgive you, I forgive you. As for you, for assuming my authority, you can go to hell. So here the righteous man goes to hell, and the deviant goes to paradise. That's a good hadith. That's something to think about, isn't it? Now, as a convert to this religion, and this is something I want people that are born into Islam, whose parents, grandparents, great-great-grandparents, all the way back 1,000 years have been Muslim, grew up maybe in Muslim environments, however. When I go home to my family, to my brothers and sisters, when I sit at the table with my mother, who's 89 years old, who donates 2 days a week, every week, to teach Mexican foreign workers in Sonoma English so that they can pass their citizenry test. My entire life she's volunteered. For this Saturday she was in civil rights, she marched. I marched when I was a little kid in civil rights marches. She was anti-Vietnam War. That's my mother. Now, somebody can call her a kafir, right? But a kafir to me is somebody who covers up the truth once it's made clear to them. My mother loves the truth. I was mentioning today to somebody, my mother is somebody that if she had a choice to abandon her principles and eat in a good restaurant or eat out of a garbage can, she would eat out of the garbage can. That's the woman that I know. Now, it's very easy to say kuffar. Read the descriptions of the kuffar in the Quran. Just read them. Go through the whole book and just look at the descriptions of the kuffar. Puffed up, arrogant, full of pride, miserly, mana'un lil khayr, never do any good. And just think about what that means. Looking out there, there's a lot of people. There's a sea of humanity out there. We have so much in common. You sit next to a person on an airplane and you start talking. He's a father, you're a father. She's a mother, you're a mother. She's from the city, you're from the same city. You went to the same university. You're struggling with the same issues. She just lost her job, you just lost your job. Those are all commonalities. That's what the Quran is talking about. Ta'alu ila kalimatin sawaa'in. Come to things we share in common. Because when you look at those things that you have in common, kindness begins to emerge. Now, this is not to set aside the martial spirit. I'm not in any way denying those aspects of Islam. It really makes me angry when people suggest that. But my understanding of the martial spirit of Islam is more akin to Bushido, in the martial tradition of the Japanese. Samurai were noble people. I'll give you an example of a Japanese cinematic version. But it's taken from the essence of if you read Bushido Code, if you read Six Rings, if you read any of the great samurai tradition in Japan, you'll get this very quickly. There is a scene in Akira Kurosawa's The Seven Samurai where they catch one of these evil, pathetic, really disgusting brigands, otaku, that would come down and steal the rice of these poor people. And the villagers, when they have him, they all go get their pitchforks and their pickaxes, and they're going to kill this man. And the samurai steps in to protect him, and he says, no. Now he's in our power. This is the time to show largesse. This is the time to show who we are. And these peasants look at them and say, no, this is the time for revenge. And they just hack them to death. And then they just show these samurai looking in utter disgust at these peasants for treating this person. Now, you can't blame the peasants. Right? I mean, they've been terrified and tyrannized by these people. But that spirit that was embodied in those samurai, that is the spirit of jihad. That is it. If you want to be the peasants and get your revenge and hack people to death, I think a psychologist could probably give a good argument in a court case, of why. I mean, do you know about the Panther Rebellion in China? Does anybody know about that? Nobody knows about this stuff. I mean, I just stumbled onto it in another searching something else. But I was really struck by this because years ago I read a book on the Opium Wars. And the Opium Wars were, the Chinese there was this British opium, they were drug dealers, basically, right? Now, the Chinese were really suffering from widespread drug use. There was a lot of drug addiction in their country. So what did they do? They basically made opium outlawed, and they started cracking down on the opium dens. Well, the British got really angry at this, right? And they basically sent ships and told them, if you don't open up these dens again, because they were making so much money, if you don't open up these dens again, we're going to blow you to smithereens. Well, the Chinese said, this can't be right, these pirates. So they sent a delegation to England, but they found out that the people that they went to meet in England, in the House of Lords, they were the stockholders of those same opium merchants. So they were suddenly perplexed because to them that was a very low thing to do. So they go back and they tell the emperor can't even believe that this is a country making money off dealing drugs. And so they go to war. Well, there's two wars, the first and second. But they lose those wars. The British put massive debt on them. Just like Iraq has to pay all this money back for the war through oil. This is the way it works. When you have power, you make people, it's like the mafia. They go in, and I know you're working for the CIA. They wouldn't have you in the mafia, right? I mean, that's what happens. So, the mafia goes and squeezes the guys for their, CIA. All those people go and do their nefarious deeds and things like that. But they squeeze people for things that they did themselves. Well, the Qing dynasty didn't have any money, so they went to the Hui people that had very large silver deposits, and they began to squeeze them, like you squeeze a turnip. Well, the Hui Muslim people rebelled against this, and this is the Panther Rebellion. It's estimated that almost 1 million Hui Muslims were killed by the Chinese between the 1850s and the 1870s. Almost a million. That's a large number of genocidal activity. But people don't, Muslims, who cares about Muslims? Who cares about a million Iraqis dead from the Gulf War? Because they're not our kind. They're not our kind. Well, there's people that think that way, but I would challenge you that Muslims can't think that way. It's like, and like Imam Zayn always says, quoting Omar Mukhtar, the film, when he says they want to kill the prisoners, say, no, we don't kill their prisoners. He said, they kill our prisoners, and Omar Mukhtar says, they're not our teachers. They're not our teachers. So who's going to show kindness? Who's going to reach out? Not me. They have to apologize. They have to recognize they're wrong. If the Prophet ﷺ took that as his strategy, when he came into Mecca, what did he do? They didn't all come out and say, oh, forgive us, we were wrong, you were right all along. No, they didn't do that. They all fled to their houses, and what did he say? You go into the house of Abu Sufyan. He could have said, don't kill Abu Sufyan, but he didn't. He honored him. Because he wasn't a king, he was a prophet. Kings, when they go into cities, they turn everything upside down. That's not what he did. He gave people their dignity. We have dignified the children of Adam. The children of Adam. Banu Adam. This is what we share. We will only achieve kindness by recognizing our shared kind. And this is what we're being called to do. And by and large, I would argue that Muslims do this quite well, generally. Really. But unfortunately, increasingly, we have our young people that, justifiably filled with rage, have begun to really start seeing others in this light that's very alien to our tradition, to what we were taught, to what our Prophet ﷺ taught. And we have to resist that in ourselves. Because we can't become the very thing that we're trying to destroy. Right? We can't become that. That's what we want to see removed from the world. Demonization of others because they're different. Islam created some of the most pluralistic pre-modern societies. In fact, they were the most pluralistic pre-modern societies in human history. There's nothing to parallel in the pre-modern world to what the Muslims created, were Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and there were exceptions to the rule, but the general rule was people were treated with dignity. And I know there's a lot of people now on this side of the fence arguing against that. Islam, the most intolerant religion. The politically incorrect guide to Islam. Robert Spencer. Some Maronite Christian who's got a lot of historical baggage. So I'll end by just reminding you that, in fact, I'll quote in English. The divisions of mankind into two groups, men proper and some other lower order of beings, inferior races, inferior cultures, subhuman creatures, nations or classes, condemned by history, is something new in human history. It is a denial of common humanity, a premise upon which all previous humanism, religious and secular, has stood. This new attitude permits men to look on many millions of their fellow men as not quite human, to slaughter them without a qualm of conscience, without the need to try to save or warn them. Such conduct is usually ascribed to barbarians or savages, men in a pre-rational frame of mind, characteristic of people in the infancy of civilization. This explanation will no longer do. It is evidently possible to attain a high degree of scientific knowledge and skill, and indeed of general culture, and yet destroy others without pity. In the name of a nation, a class, a history itself. If this is childhood, it is the dotage of a second childhood in its most repulsive form. How have men reached such a past? I would argue that this community, and I'm talking to the Muslims in this room and people of other faiths or secular humanists, whatever, that this community has a historical opportunity in this country because we, each one of us, is us and we are them. Come to a word between us that we share in common. We're on both sides of the equation. When Muslims talk about the West, when they talk about the West, they're talking about me. But they forget me. When I talk about me, I'm not just talking about my Muslim side, my 5 children who are Muslim, my wife who is Muslim. I'm talking my sister who is Muslim, her 2 children, my niece and nephew who are Muslim. I'm not just talking about them, I'm talking about my mother. I'm talking about my father. I'm talking about my brothers and sisters, my cousins, my aunts and uncles, who are not of the Islamic faith, but have come to respect the faith from their interaction with me. But I'm talking about them when I talk about who I am. You know, Malcolm X said, Plymouth Rock didn't land, we didn't land on Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us. We. Malcolm was talking about the historical we, the transcendent we. That we, in some ways, doesn't exist because those people were different people. Those people are gone. They have what they earned. They're gone. I didn't drop a bomb on Nagasaki or Hiroshima, and I don't want the Japanese people today to hold me to account for something that happened 50, 60 years ago, because I had nothing to do with that. I don't want the Iraqi people to hold me to account for what George Bush and his minions did, or Dick Cheney and his minion, whoever it was. God will hold them to account. I have no doubt about that, because I believe in the Day of Judgment. And if you didn't believe in the Day of Judgment, you know, just go mad. No rhyme or reason to this planet. But I don't want people to lump me in some category that doesn't exist called the West, because I don't know what that means anymore. And that's what I think we have the opportunity in this country to do. We have an opportunity to do something extraordinary, not only for these people in this country that are not part of the us, that we share in common as people who say, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, but we share other things in common with them. We pay the same unjust taxes. That's something to talk about. But I also want the Muslim world to see something else. The Arab poet said, وَإِنْ عَبِقَتْ فِي الْغَرْبِ أَنْفَاسُ ذِكْرِهِ وَفِي الشَّرْقِ عَلِيلٌ تَعَافَ مِنَ الضُّرِّ. If the fragrance of his remembrance diffuses in the West and there's a sick man in the East, he'll suddenly come back to his health again. Assalamu alaikum.